Hey everyone, my name is Alexandra and I am a watercolor artist. Today I want to show you guys 3 different ways to paint watercolor trees. We're going to go through an easy version, intermediate, and advanced. I hope you guys enjoy. For today's tutorial, I'm using 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. The paint palette I'm using today is by Philosophy and Co. It is their Woodlands palette. I'm using a combination of Cavern, Foxberry, Bear, as well as the deep moss color and Daylight. I'm also using some green paint and some yellow paint from Winsor & Newton. In general, if you guys have some sort of yellow, red, brown, and green, you should be all set. I'll be using Opus Allegro paintbrushes numbers 2 and 4, as well as a pencil for drawing, a napkin for drying your paintbrushes, and 2 cups of water. All right, so the first tree that we're going to start with is our easy watercolor pine tree. So what I want you guys to do is take your pencil and we're just going to draw a line down our page, and that's just going to be our guidelines so that we know where our tree is going to go. So I drew it really light and faded so that once I paint with water on top of it, the pencil doesn't show through too dark. All right, so I am taking my number 4 paintbrush and I'm just going to go into one of my green paints. And for this first tree, it's just going to be really loose and simple. So what we're going to do is, starting at the top of where I've drawn my pencil, I'm just going to paint little splotches of color. And I'm going to work my way down as we go, painting the branches. So once I paint that first little collection, it's little shapes sort of in a V coming down towards each other. Now I'm going to do another one, but I'm going to start angling them in. So I have a little bit too much water on my paintbrush there. I'm just going to dry some of it off. So you'll notice that as I paint, I'm making sure that nothing is too uniform. And the idea with this is essentially you're just painting clusters of color as you work your way down along the line. Now, as I come further down, I'm going to have them less angled up and start angling them out a little bit more. So again, you'll see it's super simple. I'm just blotching my paint on my paper and I'm just following general shapes of the branches. So as I continue to work my way down, I can sort of bring it across that center line as well. So for this branch, I'm just going to go across the middle and I'm just dotting in my paint. So just a really loose look here. And we're going to do a few more at the bottom. Just following those little line shapes as I work my way in towards the center. All right, so once I have the base of my tree painted, I am going to go in and I'm just going to take one of my brown paints here and we'll add the tree trunk in. So starting from that top point, if you guys want, you can grab a smaller paintbrush. Might be a little easier for the fine details, but I'm going to paint along where I had that pencil, just into the white spaces there. And I'm just going all the way down. You guys can make the trunk of your tree as wide or as skinny as you want it. And I'm just filling it in fully. I'm okay if it overlaps with some of the green. Again, we're just going for a super loose and simple look here. Now with my really light brown, I can even add a few little branches on top of where I've painted some of the green. And there you guys have our super simple, super basic watercolor tree. So next we are going to move on to something that's a little bit more intermediate and a little bit more complex. For this next tree, same idea to start. We are going to paint our line, sorry, not paint, we're gonna draw our line down the middle, showing where the tree is going to be. And this time I'm actually gonna go with a paintbrush that's a little bit smaller just because I want to get some more fine detail. So our first layer, we're gonna start with a nice light green. So by light, I can use the exact same color that I was using before, but I'm just gonna have it more watered down. All right, so I'm gonna follow the same concept, but this time I'm gonna be a little bit more careful with my details, and I'm going to paint some more fine lines. So coming from the top, I'm going to paint the exact same idea, except because I'm using my smaller paintbrush, I can do a little bit more detail to look like the pine needles. So I'm just painting loose lines coming down. We're just going to work our way down the tree. Now you'll notice right away if you're comparing this tree that I'm painting and the one that I just did, I have, smaller, more detailed lines, so you can see a bit more definition where I'm working my way down. And as we go, we're also going to add some shading, which will give it some more depth. So I'm being intentional with where I'm putting my branches and making sure that instead of having them all angled the same way, I kind of curve some different ways. And I'll stagger them on either side of my pencil line, which is going to be my tree trunk. And now just to give it a bit more of a natural look, I might do some shorter kind of in the middle. I might do some longer. So again, I'm still giving it that really loose look here with my branches like I did with the first one, but just more definition to my lines. And then as soon as we add the next layer, you guys will see very quickly the difference. Okay, so before adding our next layer of green, I'm going to add in brown for the tree trunk. So I'm following a super similar concept to what we did with the first one. And I'm just gonna work my way down, filling in those white spaces. So in general, I'm just starting with very light colors on this tree because I'm going to add some shading, which will take it from that beginner's watercolor tree to something that's a little bit more intermediate. Now that I have that painted, I'm going to go back in, but this time I want to take a bit of a darker green. So I'm just going to mix one on my palette here. And with my paintbrush, I'm just going to add shading to each of my branches that I've done. So I'm painting little lines along the branches that I've painted. So right away you guys will notice how it just adds another dimension. So I'm essentially going on top of what I've done, but I'm just changing the shape a bit so that you can see the lighter green showing through. And in this, I'm doing even more fine details with my branches, or with the pine needles, I guess. So you guys will notice right away how it just brings the tree to life, and it adds so much more depth. So the other thing that I can do as I'm going is, if I feel like there's too much white space in there, I could just fill some of it in and add some more little lines. So again, with each branch, what you're focusing on is the lines are sort of working inwards to the center of the branch. So I'm just working on either side here. And I do have another tutorial that's just on how to paint a pine tree that you guys can feel free to watch if you want to see me go through this a little bit slower. Now that we've done that, we're just going to add a little bit more color to our tree trunk here. So I'm going to go into my brown, just make it a little bit darker. And I'm just going to follow along where I've already painted and just add some lines going down, just to kind of show how the bark would look. And by doing that, I'm just giving it some more texture as I go. Now, if I want to, I can even go in one more time on my tree and add an even darker layer. So I won't add as many lines, but I'll just fill it in a little bit with some of this darker green, just to give it some more contrast. I know when you start with painting with watercolor, sometimes it's hard to know because the paint often dries so much lighter than what you initially put on your paper. So one of the things with watercolor is you can work on just building it up, building the depth as you go, as you add more and more color to your page. So again, with this dark green, I'm just doing tiny little lines throughout each branch, not as much as the layers that I did before. And right away you can see how much it changes the actual tree itself. So that is our sort of intermediate watercolor pine tree. And now we're gonna move on to a more advanced version. All right, so the last tree that we're gonna do is a little bit more advanced, but it is still definitely beginner friendly. So if you're just starting with painting with watercolor, you can do this. We are gonna start exactly the same as we did with our last two trees. And I'm just gonna draw a line on my page to use as my guideline for where the tree is going to go. All right, now again, we're actually going to start with the same concept of painting underneath with a really light green. This time I'm going to do one that has a little bit more yellow in it. And I'm just getting those general shapes of where my branches are going to go. So for this tree, I'm actually kind of going backwards, and I'm going a little bit less detailed than I did with my last one. And I'm just using this super light yellowy green, just trying to get the shapes and placement of where I want my branches. So again, I'm actually working with a very similar concept of starting from the top and working my way down. I'm angling the branches further out as I go down. And you'll notice that I'm starting to overlap them across where I have my line drawn for the tree trunk. So by starting with a really light color, this is a nice way to, first of all, just get your base painted, to know where you're going to put all your branches. And then to make the tree more advanced, we're going to really build up on that first layer that we paint. I'm just working my way down. Some of the branches are longer, some are shorter. I'm just gonna angle the bottom two down a bit. Just fill in some of the gaps there with some more color. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and just add my first layer of brown so that I have that as a guideline. So it's a little more clear because the pencil's a bit hard to see on the paper. So I'm just going to go really, really light with my brown paint and just fill in that space. Okay, so the second thing I'm going to do is I want to take a little bit of a darker green, but again, I'm still going to keep my paint pretty watered down. So I'm just testing it on my napkin to make sure that the color is what I want it to be. And on each of these branches that I painted, I'm just going to add some of this darker color, but mostly just to the bottom side where I know that there's going to be shadows if you're looking at a tree that's, yeah, just out and about. So again, super, super subtle, but I'm just adding another layer to the bottom. And then in this layer, I can give a bit more definition, sort of like I did with that second tree that I painted. Okay, so for that layer, I just focused on adding a little bit of that shading to the underneath of where my branches are, just so that you can kind of see that that's how it would look as the light comes in. Now I want to go ahead and add some of those more fine details. So with our layering, we're going to go in with a bit of a darker color here. And I'm going to be a little bit more precise with my branches. So if you guys want, feel free to grab a smaller paintbrush. I'm using my number 2 right now, but you definitely could go even smaller depending on the size of your paper. And just painting really fine lines this time, just to show the pine needles on the branches. So even with these top ones that I painted, I can add a few little branches into it And I'm just focusing on doing those really fine lines. And where we added the shading earlier, we're gonna go back in a bit and make it even darker. So you'll notice that as I'm painting, it's almost like little feather strokes. I'm doing it so light and fine. And I'm using those general shapes that I made initially just as my guideline for where all my little branches are gonna go. Now the nice thing about starting with that really light bright green is that you see how it stands out against the darker branches that we're adding. So as I'm working my way down to sort of those bigger, branches that are coming out, I can do multiple little stems off of it with that same concept of the really fine lines. Just getting those pine needles. Yeah, so the easiest way to imagine it is, like I said, sort of a bunch of those little like feather shapes or pine needle shapes. So one of the things for you guys to notice when you're painting these shapes is to make sure that everything isn't super straight and rigid and uniform. You want to have it nice and loose. I know I talk a lot about this when I'm talking about painting leaves and different things, but one of the keys to making your paintings look more natural and more realistic is to keep everything very, very loose. And the more that you work with watercolor, the more that you paint with it, the more you'll get comfortable and not as stiff and concerned with how things look, and you'll just have fun with it. So that's one of the things definitely to look out for when you're painting these branches. So as I'm coming towards the bottom of the tree, just because typically it is bigger, I'm doing more shapes branching out. Okay, so now that I've done that first layer, I am gonna go back in with a darker green and we're just gonna go back on top. So I've just been mixing, you guys can use any green. I've been mixing a bit of green, yellow, and brown just to get the color that I want. I like the warmth it gives to add the yellow in there. So that's how I've been making my color, but you guys can use whatever you want, even if you use the same color, because with watercolor, when you're layering, it does get darker each time. That's also fine because it will go on your paper darker than it did the layer before. So now we're gonna follow that same concept, but I'm gonna focus a little bit more on adding lines to the bottom side of my branches, just to really enhance that shading that I was working on earlier. Now I can still scatter some lines throughout on the top, but I'm just focusing on giving it that depth. So for these, I have some of them are going to be really thin and light, very defined lines, and then in some spots I'm just sort of blotching the paint in. So one of the key things to advancing your paintings in general is just working on becoming comfortable with layering with watercolor, because you'll see how just by adding a few super simple steps, you really can take your painting from something that is very basic beginners to something that is a lot more advanced. And it's such a fun thing to practice because you truly do watch your painting come to life as you go. So I'm just continuing with that same concept. I'm adding the darker paint, but I'm focusing on keeping it more towards the bottom, knowing that the light is usually coming from up higher, so the bottom generally is more shaded. I'm just going in with some more dark paint, and this time instead of doing as many of the little lines for the pine branches, I'm just spotting it in some places just to really act as that shadow. All right, and now one thing that I notice super quickly is that my tree trunk is not matching the rest of my paintings. So we are gonna add some more color in there. I'm just gonna mix up some brown here. It's a little bit darker. And I'm gonna go in to the tree trunk, and I'm doing little lines, but this time I'm being intentional to leave some more white space than I possibly had before. And I'm sort of just adding splotches to fill that in, just because I know that with bark you often see that that's how it grows. It's kind of inconsistent. It's never usually straight direct lines down. There's a lot of texture to it, so I'm just focusing on adding that into my painting. So we're just filling in spots there, and as it dries I can go in. I can even take, I have a paint here that's a little bit more of a reddish tone, so I can take that and just go in further and just add some more depth. And now the one other thing that I love to do when I'm painting trees is incorporating that color of the branches throughout, because there are branches where all of the pine needles are as well, and it also just adds so much to your painting when you use, I have a video talking about contrasting colors, but when you use that throughout the painting with the green, it really makes it pop. So I'm gonna take this same color that I had, it's this reddish brown, and I'm just gonna add it in to where I've already painted the green on the sides. So what I'm doing is I'm doing very, very thin, delicate lines. And in my line, I don't have it as a straight continuous line. I have it sort of with gaps. So I'm gonna put my paintbrush on my paper, kind of lift it up, and then continue its way out. So essentially what I'm doing is just feeding some of that red-brown color into my page. But it's nothing that's really stark or obvious. It's really subtle, and this is, yeah, one way to just transform your watercolor trees and make them really stand out, just by using that contrasting color. And then you'll see down at the bottom, because I have branches that kind of come up and down in different directions, I will do the same thing with the brown that I'm painting in, where instead of doing just one single line coming across, I'll have some sort of branching up from it, some down from it. So I'm doing that in these branches down below here. Now it's such a subtle addition just to feed the brown in through the rest of my tree, but right away you can see such a difference that just, yeah, brings it from that intermediate to advanced level. So now I do want to add some more details, so I'm just going to go in to my tree trunk again, and we're just going to give it even more contrast. So I'm just going with another layer of the same color, and I just want to make it even darker just so that it stands out more against the green. And now with this style of painting, I'm just spotting in the color to keep with that really loose and natural look. So now you'll notice as I add in the darker brown in places, the green tends to stand out even more. Right, and there you have your advanced watercolor pine tree. So I'm just gonna quickly point out some key differences between the three trees, just so you guys can see sort of what changes as we go. So tree number one, we used green and brown, just two colors. Even on its own, I do paintings with just this style of trees. They're more subtle if I'm using them in the background of things. I do enjoy just the simplicity of it. But you'll notice immediately when we move to our second tree, you can see that just by adding a second layer, right away it starts to really bring it to life. And then the other big difference is that I have more detail, it has more definition. So moving to our advanced tree, you can also see that I'm not doing anything crazy, nothing new. I'm just building on the techniques that I've been using throughout, all of my paintings. So using the first technique, by getting that base layer in the lighter color, I can build onto it by adding more detail like I did in the second painting. And in the third one, I just build on that. I add more detail, more definition, and then the biggest thing is working from light to dark and building that contrast. So with any of your guys' paintings, if you work on that, if you work on working from light to dark, layering and building your contrast into your paintings, then you truly can transform your paintings from something that is a very simple beginner level to something that is more advanced, more realistic, that just brings it to life. Thanks for watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you followed along, make sure to take a picture, send it to me, or tag me on Instagram at Alexandra Victoria Studio. I love to see what you guys are painting, so please do share. Also, if you guys aren't subscribed already to this channel, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment with what you'd like to learn next. See you next time.